Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of PAC. I call the meeting to order. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee peoples, the Mohawks of Akwesasne, the original keepers of this land. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. And Ms. Daniels, would you call the roll, please?
Thank you. Mayor Justin Towndale.
Present.
Councillor Todd Bennett.
Present.
Councillor Maurice Dupel sent his regrets. Councillor Sid Gardner.
Here.
Councillor Sarah Good.
Here.
Councillor Caroline Hébert.
Présente.
Councillor Dean Hollingsworth.
Present.
Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Councillor Claude McIntosh.
Present.
Councillor Fred Ngunjo.
Présent.
Councillor Denis Sabourin.
Present.
Lay member Ginette Guimayer.
Présente.
And lay member Ron Symington sent his regrets.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll ask if there are any conflicts of interest to be declared. And seeing none, we'll move on to adopt the agenda as presented. May I have a mover? Councillor Gardner and Councillor Ngunjo, all in favor? Thank you. And a motion, please, to adopt the minutes of Monday, November 20th. Councillor McIntosh? Councillor Gardner, all in favor? Thank you. and presentations. And before that, a review of public notice requirements by the PAC Secretary, Mr. Mark Willow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a public notice that was advertised in the Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023 edition of the Seaway News, which covered two public meeting items. The first being a review of a deferred application to remove the hold category and rezone the vacant parcel of land known municipally as 10 Brookdale Avenue from mixed-use commercial to mixed-use commercial with site-specific exceptions. Secondly, a city-initiated application submitted by city staff for a zoning bylaw amendment to make minor modifications to the City of Cornwall's comprehensive zoning bylaw as amended. And in addition to these notices, there was also a newspaper notice provided to all within 400-foot radius circulation. A circulation letter was sent out to landowners around the subject properties on November 17th, 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Boileau. And moving on to the public meeting items, I'd ask Ms. Lindsay Parisian to walk us through the first one, please.
Okay, good evening, Madam Chair, members of PAC, members of the public, and fellow staff. My name is Lindsay Parisian, and I'll be giving a brief presentation on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment application for 10 Brookdale Avenue. So this slide is just a very brief overview of the presentation for you this evening. First, I'll go through the purpose and background, following the then looking at the site characteristics and surrounding land uses. Following this, I'll be reviewing the various planning development applications and the proposed development that have been provided to date. Then we'll review some of the provincial legislation, the city's official plan and zoning bylaw. Following that, we will evaluate the proposed development, also review some of the comments that we received to date, as well as the next steps moving forward. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the proposed planning development application and to discuss the site-specific exceptions to the zoning bylaw amendment and removal of the hold category on 10 Brookdale Avenue. I do want to make note that tonight's meeting, there is no recommendation to pass a bylaw this evening. This evening, the public meeting is to review the application for the public to learn about the development itself and also to ask questions and to provide opportunities to learn more. So the subject site is situated at the northwest corner of Water Street West and Brookdale Avenue. Its municipal address is 10 Brookdale Avenue as well. This aerial image, as you see, is taken as of fall 2022. And as you notice, the property is separated from the former Dontar lands that are surrounding the parcel itself. Looking a bit more closely at the subject site, it is former industrial lands. Previously situated on this property was the former salt storage building. And as you notice in this image, just directly adjacent to the property itself, that's where the former bridge was located when it was still erected in our community. The subject parcel is approximately 1.1 hectares in area. In the city's official plan, it is designated comprehensive redevelopment area and is currently zoned as mixed-use commercial zone with a hold category. So looking at the surrounding land uses, to the north, as I mentioned before, it was a former industrial lands. And if you go further north, you'll actually, you'll notice that it is the Benson Center Arena Complex. Looking towards the east, there's low-rise residential land uses. To the south of the property, that's where you'll notice you'll have a Cornwall Canal lands that are currently owned by Transport Canada. And further into the west, it is also the former industrial lands, as we know as a former Dontar site. So this slide is just a very quick overview of the proposed development itself. I won't go too much into detail about it as the owner's consultants are here with us this evening, and they will provide further details on the proposed development itself. So these are two images of the property that were recently taken. The two photos are taken at the corner of Brookdale Avenue and Water Street West, looking out onto the vacant parcel of land itself. And the image on the right, that's where you'll notice that there is a roadway that has been barricaded off from the public itself. However, that is intended to be the future extension of Water Street West, which I'll speak to more later in this presentation. So this slide, there are two renderings that were provided by the owner's retained architects. The image on your left is the view looking onto the property, I guess, towards the southeast corner of Brookdale Avenue and Water Street West. And the image on the right is the opposite angle, looking back onto the property itself. We'll see the two buildings as well as the two-story commercial space at grade and the outdoor amenity space that's being proposed as a rooftop patio. So this site is the most updated version of the proposed site plan that we received to date. And for those of you who can't see some of the details, so you'll notice that Building A is the proposed 21-story mixed-use development that will be facing Brookdale Avenue. So that's the building more towards the north. I apologize, the angle is actually not as oriented as best as it could be, but it's for it to be more legible. And Building B, I guess. And Building B is the proposed at 18 stories. It's also a mixed-use building with commercial space at grade. And that building will be facing towards Water Street West if and when it gets extended. Connecting the two buildings, you'll notice there's that two-story podium where it will have rooftop amenity spaces. In behind the two buildings or two towers is where you'll see the 3-level parking structure in the rear, which will offer approximately 428 parking spaces in total for the proposed development. And on the site plan, you'll also notice that red triangular hatched area. So that area has been identified by city staff as the area that must be conveyed to the city in order for Water Street West to be extended. That is a portion of the property that must be conveyed and transferred to the city. So just quickly looking at the various planning development applications. So this evening we are discussing the proposed zoning bylaw amendments to permit site-specific exceptions to the mixed-use commercial zone standards, and also to remove the hold category. Some of the site-specific exceptions to the mixed-use zone include reductions in property line setbacks, overall reduction in the total parking stalls. We're also looking at increasing the lot occupancy as well as the building heights. These are some of the zone deficiencies that have been currently identified with the proposed development. Another planning development application is site plan control, which is currently underway, and the following slide will actually speak a little bit more in detail about that process. And if the property were to be rezoned, successfully rezoned, and also if site plan control were to be granted, then a future draft plan of condominium application will be required, as the owner has expressed their intent to not retain ownership over this development. So as mentioned, site plan control is currently under review by the City Site Plan Control Review Committee. A detailed commentary letter was provided in June of earlier this year. A revised site plan, as you saw earlier, has been provided to staff. However, a full resubmission has not yet been received, and that's intentional due to the comments and feedback that we received to date, and also based on the outcomes of tonight's meeting. So when reviewing this application, we looked at various provincial legislations and provincial policy statements, as well as the city's official plan and zoning bylaw. I do want to make note that there have been a lot of recent changes to the Planning Act. For example, we had Bill 108, Bill 109, and Bill 23, all made changes to the Ontario Planning Act as a province's effort to expedite the review and approval processes to accommodate more housing stock all throughout Ontario, so that those policies or those changes would be supportive of this type of development. However, we also looked at some local policies and provisions as well. So I do want to take a little bit of a closer look at the city's official plan. In the planning report, Table 1 was prepared, and what it does is summarizes some of the various goals and policies that really speak to the proposed development at 10 Brookdale Avenue. These policies were selected in order for staff to help consider the overall appropriateness of development. Some policies are supportive and some do raise concerns. So for example, the current official plan designation is comprehensive redevelopment area. This property or this proposed development could be viewed as the seeding project to help redevelop the adjacent properties. However, when you look at the urban design goals and policies, there are some concerns that were raised with some of those policies included. For example, compatibility and height and massing of the adjacent dwelling units is required, and abrupt variations in height should be avoided. So as you notice, there is an opposing perspective that should be also considered with the proposed development itself. So this property, as mentioned, is currently zoned as a mixed-use commercial zone. Mixed-use commercial zone, it generally permits a mix of commercial and residential land uses. It should be noted that the proposed development is permitted in the zone and may be combined with some non-residential uses, for example, offices, personal service establishments, place of assembly or recreational and athletic facilities, as well as restaurants and retail stores. However, it should be noted that at this time, we're not sure as to what type of commercial uses are going to be proposed at this time. So now the next set of slides are going to evaluate the proposed development at 10 Brookdale Avenue. So looking at a record of site condition, so a record of site condition summarizes the environmental condition of the property. Usually this type of requirement is required when an owner is proposing to change the use of a property to one that is more sensitive. So for example, in this case, the former property was used for industrial land use purposes. The intended use of the site is now going to be residential. Residential land uses are considered to be more sensitive than industrial land uses. So given the history of the subject site, a record of site condition was required as part of the application submission package. And as of January 17, 2023, a record of site condition was filed with the Environmental Site Registry and identified that the intended land use purposes was for residential. So therefore, staff have been reassured that the site can be redeveloped for the commercial and residential land uses. So a shadow study was also required as part of this development application. A shadow study is used to evaluate the movement of the sun across the site and to understand how the shadows cast by nearby buildings will impact the solar axis and natural lighting. As many of you would imagine, that the proposed development would considerably change the built form of the property itself as it currently sits vacant. Therefore, we felt that it was important that a shadow study was provided to help provide some measurable data for staff to consider when reviewing this application. This slide is an image of the shadow study that's prepared. And as you notice here, so there's two shaded areas. One of them is shaded orange, which is the proposed shadow of the development as if it were to be at 18 stories and 21 stories. So the shadow casting that you see is that proposed development. However, it also compares the potential shadow impacts of the building if it were to comply with the maximum building height of 30 meters. So I won't get into too much detail about this study analysis. The consultants here this evening will provide further details on it. So looking at the city's current transit system, the city currently has a couple bus routes that could service this property. As you'll notice, the line highlighted in purple is the Riverdale route, and there are two bus stops that are identified as markers on this map here. Currently, the services do seem appropriate for the proposed development. However, improvements may occur in a variety of formats. For example, a new bus stop could be added at the intersection of Brookdale Avenue and Pine Tree to better serve future residents and riders. And also, I have received comments from our transit division identifying that an on-demand service may be offered outside of the regular hours of operation for Cornwall bus transit system. So again, it gives an alternative for future residents. And in the near future, I believe the Transit Master Plan is also anticipated to be updated in 2024. So discussions with city staff, Transport Canada, the Seaway International Bridge, and Federal Bridge Corporation have occurred. And this is all related to the federal lands divestiture process, which is important since the area south of the subject site must be divested in favor of the city in order for future Water Street to be extended for the site itself. The extension of Water Street is crucial as it is a main component to the design and layout of the site. It provides the primary access, ingress and egress for this site for Water Street West. And as I showed you previously, the area in red is a portion of the site itself that must be conveyed to the city in order to accommodate this future roadway. And so the images that you see up on the screen is the intersection of Brookdale Avenue and Water Street, the upper left image. That road should be extended across the southern property limits of the property itself, in between the canal lands and the property. So the Planning Division has received several comments and written submissions regarding the proposed development. In general, some of the primary concerns raised are due to the uncertainty of the impacts of the existing residents towards the east. Other concerns include impacts to the city's waterfront and its potential for development, as well as the overall appropriateness of this development within our community, as it relates to building height, massing, density, and the requested variances to the zoning bylaw. Another item of concern was sense of place and context and understanding the community, as well as the history in it, and the site being a former industrial land use has also been raised as a concern. So following this public meeting, the next step will be for the proponent to consider some of the concerns raised and possibly incorporate their desired changes in a revised site plan. This site plan will then be recirculated to the Site Plan Review Committee for detailed review and commentary. We do anticipate on bringing this item back to amend the zoning bylaw at a future PAC meeting in 2024. We recognize that this will add some additional time to the review and approval process. However, this additional time is appropriate, as it will allow for further discussions with the federal lands divestiture process to continue. So that concludes my presentation for you this evening. Thank you for listening, and now at this time I will turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Parisian. So I think what we'll do is we'll invite the proponents to speak if they so choose. And I understand Anthony Homick will speak. Welcome, Anthony.
And Ricky Papa as well.
Okay. That's Khalid Mahmood joining you, is it?
No, that's Ricky Papa.
Thank you. Okay, I have his name here. The architect, then.
Correct. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of council, and members of the community for coming out this evening. I just want to say, thanks right off the top for the opportunity to present the proposal to you this evening. And, we're here to solicit feedback from members of council, and obviously we've been working closely with staff, but we're looking forward to hearing feedback from members of council and members of the community alike. And certainly we're, as I said, we're here to listen, and we'll take comments back to the owners of the property, and we'll be back to Planning Advisory Committee in the new year. So I won't spend too much time. I don't want to repeat too much of what Ms. Parisian has said this evening. I think that she summarized everything quite well, but just to touch on a couple of pieces. Obviously, we're all familiar with where the site is located. The area is approximately 2.8 acres, just shy of 3 acres. There's about 142 meters of frontage on Brookdale and about 75 meters of frontage on the canal. And as everyone knows, it was formerly an industrial site, which we would now consider a brownfield. As Ms. Parisian talked about, it is a mixed-use project which would consist of 2 towers of 21 and 18 stories located on a shared podium. And my colleague here, Ricky, will talk about more of the architectural elements of the project afterwards. I'm going to touch on the planning. At the beginning here, there are approximately, right now, 506 total residential units. 380 resident parking spaces are proposed. That represents parking at a rate of about 0.75 per unit. And there are currently proposed 48 parking spaces that would be shared between visitors to the building and the commercial spaces. There is approximately 1,100 square meters of commercial space and approximately 1,700 square meters of amenity space for building residents. Access is currently proposed from both Brookdale and from the Water Street extension that you've heard about. So just touching on some of the planning matters that are important to the evaluation of the application. The provincial policy statement is the document in the province that provides direction on matters of provincial interest related to land use planning and development. As a key part of Ontario's policy-led planning system, the PPS sets the policy foundation for regulating the development and use of land. And as Ms. Parisian mentioned, there have been quite a few changes to the Planning Act. It's been a challenge for all of us to keep up, I think, but there certainly have been changes at the provincial level that are aimed at stimulating residential development and increasing the housing supply across the province. Now, the provincial policy statement directs development and growth to what are referred to as settlement areas, and obviously the City of Cornwall would be considered a settlement area. And the proposal, in my professional opinion, is consistent with the PPS for a number of reasons, including the fact that the development represents an efficient use of land and resources. The development will efficiently use existing municipal infrastructure and will not require any expansion to the municipal infrastructure. The development as proposed can be adequately serviced with current domestic water supplies and sewage services available. And the preliminary stormwater management design has taken into account recent local climatic trends as well as the impacts of climate change, together with best practices in stormwater management. Lastly, as you've heard, the subject site is supportive of public transit and is also supportive of active transportation, as it is located in close proximity to the waterfront where there is the trail system. With respect to the city's official plan, the site is designated comprehensive redevelopment area, and the comprehensive redevelopment area broadly is a fairly permissive official plan designation that is envisioning growth and redevelopment of former industrial lands primarily. And some of the goals in the CRA designation are to identify those sites and locations within the city that have unique characteristics and redevelopment potential, and to provide the incentive to redevelop such sites, to encourage a comprehensive development approach that will enhance and promote the most appropriate use of the site while preventing indiscriminate mixing of incompatible uses, and also, sort of as I touched on a minute ago or a second ago, provide for the flexibility in the development of sites by encouraging a range of land uses that are integrated and compatible. So very similar to the goals and policy objectives of the provincial policy statement, with respect to the official plan, this subject site represents a vacant, underutilized brownfield property that the official plan envisions redeveloping. As I mentioned, the development is supportive of active transportation as well as the city's transit system. It will provide a range of housing units and sizes and a significant amount of supply, which all municipalities across the province are in desperate need of housing. And lastly, as I mentioned, the project can be supported by the city's existing sewer and water infrastructure, and we have taken care to design the site with respect to stormwater management. Briefly on zoning, the zoning bylaw serves to implement the official plan designation, and so the site is zoned mixed-use commercial with a holding symbol, and the holding symbol will be ultimately removed from the site once we all together arrive at development that is, balances everybody's interests and is something that we can move forward with. So as Ms. Parisian mentioned, the mixed-use commercial zone permits the apartment dwellings and also permits a wide variety of non-residential uses. And also, as Ms. Parisian mentioned, the details of the zoning bylaw amendment are, we continue to refine those elements of the zoning bylaw amendment, and eventually we'll arrive at a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment to permit some form of development on this site. So just to briefly summarize from a planning perspective, the application has been reviewed against the policies in the provincial policy statement and the city's official plan. We've paid particular interest to the mixed-use commercial zoning bylaw standards. As I noted, the city's official plan has specifically targeted sites just like this one for redevelopment. The proposal is supportive of active transportation and public transit. The proposal will provide a range of unit sizes that will contribute to the city's housing supply and will provide an inherently more affordable housing option. And lastly, in my opinion, the proposal represents an appropriate amount of intensification. And as Ms. Parisian mentioned, we have completed a shadow study, and we don't intend to walk through every slide of the shadow study. We do have it available if there are questions on the shadow study, but we have completed the shadow study, and we are of the opinion that the shadow study has demonstrated that there will be minimal impacts on the existing residential neighborhoods, particularly to the east. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ricky.
We can stay on that slide for a bit. Yeah. Thanks, Anthony. So my name is Rick Papa. I'm the architect and, I'm the project architect for the development. I'm going to go over some of the design rationale, characteristics, and architectural features of the proposed buildings. The proposed development consists of 2 mixed-use buildings and a shared rear parking structure. The 21-story building situated along Brookdale Avenue contains 316 residential units and approximately 8,000 square feet of commercial space. The 18-story building situated along Water Street contains 190 units and approximately 8,000 square feet of commercial space as well. Residential entry to the 2 buildings is located at the corner of Brookdale and Water. Secondary entry is provided at the south and west faces of the building from the parking structure. The second story of the shared podium contains the residential amenities, which include a fitness room, a lounge room, and a party room. The exterior amenity space is located at the roof level of the podium, so the third level of the podium, and it includes barbecues, seating areas, dining areas, and green spaces. The parking structure is located at the northwest portion of the site and is 3 stories, containing 428 stalls. Vehicular entries into the parking area are off of Brookdale and Water, and the service and pickup is off of Water Street. So I think we can switch to the next. So this is a view over the waterway, facing. Oh, it wasn't. The buildings are organized on site to be outward facing from the block, creating retail adjacencies to existing pedestrian paths and vehicular traffic ways. The orientation of the buildings maximizes views to the canal, adjacent trail systems, and parks. Vehicular and pedestrian corridors are designed for efficient ingress and egress, as well as the circulation of pedestrians through the shared public realm. Parking and servicing has been placed at the interior of the site, away from the public edge and out of view of the public realm. Public safety and enjoyment has been taken into consideration when designing the landscape components of the site. The exterior amenities are located away from public streets or visible parking, providing opportunities for sunlit and shaded areas. The exterior landscape amenities are within the view of the residential units and shared amenities. Retail and commercial uses are located adjacent to the pedestrian walkways, and the walkways will be tree-lined and landscape-lined and provide access to the proposed retail and residential lobby entries. Yeah, we can switch to the... So this is a view across Brookdale. The overall character and anticipated development of the site will be in keeping with the designated land use to be compatible with aesthetic and nearby structures and be considerate of the shared public realm. Taking aesthetic notes from the waterfront buildings in Cornwall, such as cotton mills, conversion buildings, residential buildings. The buildings feature masonry podium and durable materials to provide a lasting maintenance-free building. The first story of each building will be 4.5 meters tall and articulated with glass panels spanning most of the public face. Building facades will be clad in large glazed windows, durable precast panels, and accents of pre-finished metal cladding. Residential upper floors are set back from the lower floors, with residential floors finished in a lighter tone than the podium, creating the perception of being a separate but cohesive layer of the rest of the massing. The mechanical and utility equipment are located in the interior or screened areas of the pedestrian screened away from the pedestrian and residential views. Where feasible, the intakes and exhausts will be located away from view and with the least impact to the public realm. Rooftop green spaces, walkable paths, exercise areas, barbecue areas, dining areas, and seating areas are located in the exterior amenity space. Lastly, barrier-free access will be provided to all principal entries of the building and parking levels. As per the OBC, the Ontario Building Code, all building amenities will be accessed via a barrier-free path of travel. Exterior amenities will be designed in an inclusive manner. And as per the OBC, the required amount of suites will be provided barrier-free access. So I'm going to go over some of the building design features here. So this is the corner of Water and Brookdale. This is the two-story plus one-story exterior amenity space. This features this will contain the residential lobby entry, as well as the interior amenity spaces for the two residential buildings. This is a set of diagrams explaining the orientation of the buildings on site. So the pink is the site. Go to the next. This is the ground floor plan of the two buildings. So you can see the parking layout at the rear of the site and the two residential buildings. So that pink block is the 2.5-story level parking. The first floor of which is half submerged into the grading. So the next block at the corner of Water and Brookdale, the residential amenity, residential entry. The retail blocks with the proposed entry locations marked. And then the diagram just showing the orange area, I don't know if you can see, but that's where the services are located in between the parking structure and the retail spaces. Sorry. That's good. So this is the proposed landscaped area in green. Now we're going to the second floor of the building. This is where there are residential units as well as the residential amenity. So residential units in light purple and the residential amenity in light blue. And this is the third floor with the proposed exterior amenity for the residential units in green, and again, the residential units in purple. And then the remainder of the building, the remainder of the towers is residential units. I think that's it. Yep.
We can pull this out if we need. So that's it for our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions whenever you'd like to call upon us for questions. Happy to answer anything.
Thank you very much. I'll invite PAC to pose any questions they wish, either to planning staff or to the developers. Councillor Bennett.
Good evening. I'm just wondering, how did you arrive at 21 and 18 stories? What's behind that decision?
It's between a mix of market demand and also what we have analyzed what the site can hold based on shadow study, servicing, just the proportions of the site in general, and parking. Parking is a major factor in this type of development.
Does the profitability of the project change drastically if you were to shave some floors off?
Yes.
So
In short, yes.
Yeah. So would that be the bigger reason why we're this high?
Yeah, but I think it's a great site for density. The boulevard is quite wide, and the shadowing, just based on our analysis, does not affect in any major way the residential areas surrounding.
Thank you.
And Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you aware of the recommendation by basically says, consider at a later date. Is that going to impact? Microphone, please, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's not working. Try the button on the right. Oh. Trust me, I've been using these silly things forever. I think I know. You hear me now, Sid? Yes. Okay. So, recommendation says consider it a later date. How does that impact this project if we look at a later date?
Obviously, the owners and developers of the site would like to be in the ground as soon as possible, but we certainly are aware of the recommendation in the report to consider this at a later date. And I think, as both Ms. Parisian mentioned and I kind of touched on at the beginning, we're here to hear comments from council and members of the public, and we're happy to work through the process with staff and happy to come back to a future PAC meeting in the new year.
Okay, I'll hold some debate till the motion, Madam Chair.
And Ms. Gee, Mayor?
Is there, because I understand there are going to be condos, right? Is there a pre-sale attached to the building of this? Do you need a certain percentage to be pre-sold before the building can start? And if they're not sold, there's no build?
That is typically the way it works, and it varies by project, but typically with most lenders, you do need to reach a minimum threshold of units sold somewhere, usually in the neighborhood of 60%, before you're able to get the financing to actually put the shovels in the ground. So yeah, there is a significant amount of pre-sales required to get a project like this going.
And would we have an idea at the start what the price range would be for those units, or?
It's unfortunately too early to make comment on that at this point.
Mr. Boileau?
Yeah, if I may, Madam Chair, I just want to go back to the earlier comment about timing and want to be clear to the committee. It's been raised by both planning staff and the proponents, but there is a requirement for a land transfer from Transport Canada to the City of Cornwall to allow for Water Street to be extended. And that is still in conversation and looking to accomplish that in the early part of next year. But it's essential really to this development that we acquire that property and are able to have Water Street extended west of Brookdale Avenue. That is really the frontage piece that this development fronts onto to the south, so that it is a corner site. But at this time, it is not a corner site. It is a site on Brookdale Avenue only. So it's essential, and we need to finish that before. I guess what I'm saying is that we're not in a position to recommend a high density zoning on a property that only fronts on Brookdale Avenue. It really needs to have access both from Brookdale Avenue and from Water Street to accommodate this development.
Thank you, Mr. Boileau. Ms. Good?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Boileau, do you have any comments as far as an anticipated timeline for that divestment?
We, Mr. Fothrop and Ms. Parisian and I have been, well, not I as much these days, but Mr. Fothrop is in conversation with Transport Canada to try and finalize that. I'll turn that over to Jamie, and he may be able to add.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Boileau, through you, Madam Chair. We are actively in discussions with Transport Canada regarding the divestiture of this land. There is a process that they must follow in which they circulate to the various agencies and to gauge interest in acquiring the property. So that's where it's at now. If we are the only agency to speak up, then we could potentially see the transfer of this land, I'll say within the first quarter of 2024, if things progress well.
Okay.
But there are no guarantees as to how that process will go, but if things do progress favorably for us and for the project, then it could happen as early as that first quarter.
Okay, that's not bad. There are things about this development that I like and that I appreciate, and there are things that I find concerning. and really just looking at the kind of the incompatibility of heights and sort of how it fills in, you know, this infill need, this need for densification, you know, bolstering public transit and all that. And obviously I understand the changes to the zoning bylaw as far as height requirements are concerned, but there's a lot of other changes that are being requested here in regards to frontage, basically, of the property. So reduced from 6 meters to 3 meters, and there's not a lot of landscaped area around. What's the, you know, I want to ensure that as we're doing something that is going to notably shape our urban design, the overall feel, and especially this is the entrance from the States. This is the entrance to Cornwall for a lot of people. I think we need to maintain that width. I think we need to make sure that it's something that feels comfortable for our pedestrians, and you know, we want to ensure that active transit is really considered in this. In the retail section, that is connected to the parking garage, correct?
In the sense that it's at the same level, it's connected, but it's not actually
There's no access.
physically connected. There will be access for the commercial stalls to the front of the building, to the retail frontage.
So if someone were going to be like shopping, let's say there's retail, like clothing or something to that effect, would they park in the back and then they would have to walk all the way around?
No,
the block
there's
to-
egress corridors that link
Okay, so
the
it is
parking
connected.
structure to the retail.
Okay.
Yeah.
It didn't appear that way in the renderings. And actually, I appreciate these renderings because I find them much nicer than the ones that were in our packet, if I can be completely honest about that. Can I ask, probably Mr. Fothrop, in a normal suburban development, or maybe even in some of the more recent ones in the last few years, higher density, let's say, how many units are we talking on a almost 3-acre parcel? Like, if you were gonna ballpark it?
Through you, Madam Chair, to be honest, I wouldn't know offhand as to, I don't know if Mr. Boileau might have some numbers off the top of his head.
I unfortunately don't have the lot areas handy right now, but so for example, the building that has been proposed at the corner of Belmont and Montreal Road is also probably considerably smaller than this site, and it was in, I believe, the 130s, 140s unit,
Okay.
total units. Of course, we have some other projects that have been built. You know, our own Cornwall Housing is 77 units. So this is, of course, a lot more in terms of number of units. It's obviously the largest. And the other thing to consider is the size of units. So there's a full range of of sizes in this one, everything from bachelor to 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. So sometimes if we look at the others, they may not include, you know, bachelor units. They may be predominantly one or the other, so.
Fair enough. And I guess I just wanted to kind of get an idea of how much density we're talking here on a small parcel of land. I mean, I think it's good for us in terms of our infrastructure. It's not a huge demand. It's not like a big suburb. We don't need to put in all kinds of new water lines and that kind of thing. Part of my concern comes with the actual orientation of the building, the fact that it's the southern east corner of this otherwise blank slate, and I wonder how this is going to impact the future development of that site. If it becomes a seating project, if we're starting with these buildings at 18 and 21 stories high, how is that going to impact the buildings that are being constructed behind them? Are we going to be seeing, or I don't even know who I'm asking this to, but do we anticipate that if this project moves along as it's being proposed right now, that we are going to see even higher high-rises in that area? And how will this project potentially influence the future development of that site?
I can provide a bit of information. All that we have for the balance of the Paris Holdings property, the former Domtar property, is a concept plan that was drawn up by FOTEN and I think we've shared some of that with you. It's sort of a mixture of low density to middle density or mid density residential, has some other uses as well. We're further along in conversation with them on the more western half of the development, and it tends to be a little bit of a lower density development. We've not had any recent conversations with them about development adjacent or in fact in the east half of the property, and I would invite comments from others in the department if they have any more recent information, but I don't believe has occurred.
Okay.
Ms. Parisian, I see you nodding your head.
No, through you, Madam Chair, there hasn't been any further conversations in regards to the Paris Holding properties itself. We received a concept plan, but as Mr. Ball had mentioned, it was primarily focusing on the more western portion of the property. I think a lot of it has to do with the contamination on the property itself and where it's located, and they're sort of strategizing areas in which there's less to start first, and then we'll work their way throughout the site.
Thank you.
Fair enough. And so I guess I'll finish off by saying I'm supportive of development on this land. I think I want to be really excited about this project. It's just a bit startling. Like, it's so much higher than anything else that we have in our community that it really is important that we do it right, and that, you know, the developer understands that this is going to shape the way this community looks and the way that we are perceived by visitors and by residents. And I don't want this to screw the people on the other side of the street, is what I'm saying. And I hope that's okay language. I hope that this project gives back as much to the community as we want from it. And I'm really excited to see the Domtar lands turned into something viable. So thank you for your presentation.
And Councillor Ninjo, and then Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much. I share many concerns of my colleague Sarah Good. I have some questions that I would like to discuss with you. First, maybe with you too, because it's when I see this picture, it looks like we're gonna have a project like this in an area where nothing else exists around. So there is like a big gap between what you want to build there and what exists in the city. There is something that do not, I feel uncomfortable with that. Don't you feel the same thing?
Part of the allure of a mixed-use building is that it provides retail and residential opportunities all in one place. And I think that that retail opportunity is missing in that area for sure. But hopefully, you know, we can't predict the future, but those tenants, those retail tenants will serve that immediate community. So in short, no, I don't agree, because I think that this project's bringing both retail and residential opportunities to an area that has almost nothing in it. So I view it in the opposite way. I see it as an opportunity to develop that. Let's face it, it's a brownfield site. There's nothing there, and it's not in any way animating that side of the street, which I think this project does well.
Okay, let's go further. Let's say we have these project that appear there. We have just beside a huge land of former industrial lands, right? That was non-recognized polluted. What is going to be, how we going to deal with people living on this project, on this building, and land that are still polluted? I think this is going to be for the city. Did we clean this place? What is the situation? What is the perspective of these?
Through you, Madam Chair, pardon me, you're asking the condition of the adjacent former industrial lands?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, they are currently former industrial lands that do have environmental issues on them that will need to be addressed in order for redevelopment of those lands to occur. And so the conversation regarding as to what that a potential redevelopment of those lands might look like is still taking shape. We're quite early days. It's a different developer that owns that parcel of land, and they are in sort of preliminary conversations with planning staff to discuss what sort of conceptual options might exist for them. But for the time being, they would remain as vacant lands, and there is currently a hold on them as well, similar to this, that would need to be addressed in order for development to take place on those adjacent property, on that adjacent property.
Thank you very much.
And if I could add to that, you heard in Ms. Parisian's presentation that this particular site does have a record of site condition on it, so it has been demonstrated that it's suitable to be converted to residential. Typically what the environmental consultants are looking at is the risk of contamination to future property uses. With projects like this that would be fully serviced by municipal water and municipal sewer services, there's certainly a lot less risk of, say, putting redevelopment with houses on wells and septic systems on a former industrial site. So I think former contamination certainly is an issue, but it's able to be cleaned up. It just costs a lot of money. And if I can just maybe touch on your commentary about the heights as well. I think really, and maybe even touching a little bit on some of the setbacks and things like that, is that a lot of what I take into consideration as a planner is impact. The test of impact on neighboring property owners and on existing residential neighborhoods. And so sort of the main thing that we're looking at, and points well taken about the setbacks and pedestrian realm, we'll certainly take those away. I think with respect to heights, we did do a very comprehensive shadow study, and I'd invite everyone to take a look at those, or we could walk through them. It's extensive. It would take us a long time to walk through every single hour of the day with the shadow studies, but what we've demonstrated, and I think it's worth noting that with any sort of high-rise development, shadow is inevitable, and some amount of shadow is going to happen. What I think we've demonstrated through our shadow study is that delta between the shadow from an as-of-right building and the proposed buildings is really not that significant. If you take a look at what Ms. Parisian mentioned in terms of that orange on the shadow studies, we don't see it as a significant impact from the additional shadows of these heights. And so that's kind of the biggest impact we would look at considering with high-rise development. I hope that helps.
All right, thank you very much. Speaking about the former industrial land, I would like to know if there is any part in this area that can receive this kind of project. Is it this lot is the only part that can receive this kind of project, or do we have in this land other parts that can receive those kind of projects?
Through you, Madam Chair, are you asking if the other portions of the
Yes, of
Domtar
the,
properties
yes.
that could have this level of intensity of development?
Yes.
I would say that possibly. Again, the concepts they've shared to date do not indicate this degree of intensity, but again, it's still early days and they're still at the conceptual stage. A development such as this could open the door to some increased intensity within the vicinity of an adjacent development that has this height that it certainly could be a consideration, but the conceptual drawings we've seen to date aren't as intense as this proposed development.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Yes, and Mr. Waller, do you have something to contribute there?
I was just going to say for everyone, and if you haven't noticed it, the FOTEN concept plan is on page 66 of the agenda, and you'll see from that the lower of the two diagrams there shows the lower density development in the general west half of the site, while the east half of the site seems to have perhaps a bit more of walk-up apartments and low to medium density development. So just so that you have an idea of what they had provided to us back in 2018, that's the density of development that they brought to our attention.
And Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll start by 20 years ago when I ran for council. I could see the potential in this city. It was there. Along came the people who did the Cornwall project, and I was elated by that. Even though it was on the waterfront, they still allowed the public free access to the water. My problem is if I was to buy one of the condos either on 3 sides of the building on the right or the building on the left at the back, the last bloody thing I would want to do is pay good money for a condo overlooking chimneys that look like hang, that are rusting, that are dirty. Have you had any discussions with the landowners to find out whether these things are going to come down? Because people aren't going to, I'm sure, will not buy that land to look at those ugly chimneys. Also, having worked at Domtar for 7 years, and I know what went into the ground there. And so it worries me about leaching. We had an apartment building on 2nd and I don't remember the other. It was torn down because of the leaching that was coming from an old gas station. That apartment was torn down. So I worry about the leaching from the rest of the property, from the Domtar property. That would, to me, would have to be checked first. I have a lot of other questions I want to ask, but right now, I'm really supportive of this, providing we do it the proper way. And I think it can be done like Cornwall was done the proper way. Thank you for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Gay.
I have a question about parking. You're at .7, which is not unusual, but you're already short, through you, Mrs. You're already short for people that buy in condos, if they would even get 1 unit each, and you're bringing in 3,000 square feet of retail. And based on that design, there is nowhere else to park. So on Sunday morning, when everybody's at home and I'm coming to buy something there, I have no place to park. And it's not that Brookdale or that area. There is no street parking there either. And if I rented, I could see it, but if I'm paying $1 million to get a 2-bedroom waterfront condo, I would want 1 or even 2 parking spaces. So how do you plan to address that?
I would suggest that with respect to the overall parking number, we have within the development team, there is a transportation consultant, Tatham Engineering, who's been retained to provide advice on traffic and parking. And they've looked at other similar projects, not necessarily in Cornwall, but other similar markets, let's say. And they have suggested to us that a parking rate of 0.75 is an appropriate parking rate. With respect to your question or your comment, I guess, about somebody might want to buy 2, that's certainly something that would come later in the game with the developers, but there will be people inevitably who don't want to buy a parking space, and there may be parking spaces available for someone who wants to buy 2.
No, it is because you're adding 3,000 square feet of retail space, and unless the retail is only for the people who live in the building, people will have to go to those retail shops. And where are they going to park?
There is also, I did mention briefly, there is retail and visitor parking also as part of the proposal. There's 48 spaces that have been proposed that would be shared between the retail uses and the visitors to the building. Those numbers for the visitor, or sorry, rather the parking that's been provided for the retail spaces is actually in accordance with the parent bylaw for the city. So.
Thank you. And Councillor McIntosh?
Yeah, I'm glad, through you, Madam Chair, just to Mark, I didn't realize Ted Faubert, who made that presentation in 2018, that plan is still in effect, it's still in the books.
Well, it's a concept plan.
Yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair. It's a concept plan, and so it's really the best information we have on what they would like to do on that property. And of course, as Lindsay and I were both saying, it appears that they're staying with the general idea of the concept plan with their western half proposal.
It didn't include this parcel. This is a separate parcel, was,
Always has been, yes.
always has been. Okay. When it comes to building the two towers, do you build one and then later on build another one, or you build them at the same time?
So the site has been designed around the idea that it could be flexible, could go both, depending on the market conditions. So it could be phased into 2 phases, or it could be all sold as one.
Okay. I guess this question would be to the architect. You done soil tests that would require whatever?
Yeah, so we have, there's a geotech and hydrology report for the site, and it dictated the location of the underground parking. So we weren't able to go completely underground. We were just able to go half a story into the grade for that. And I suspect, and it hasn't gone to a technical design, but it's going to be piling, which is a deeper type of foundation based on the water level of the site.
Would that require pile driving?
Yes.
Extensive pile driving?
I don't. I can't say yet because it hasn't been designed.
The only reason I asked that question, there was almost in my front yard, there was a building built about 8 to 10 years ago, and there wasn't going to be pile driving. Then they decided to have pile driving, and I lived through an entire summer, everything shaking in the house, and I ended up with a cracked foundation. So that's one of the byproducts of pile driving, is the neighborhood does have to endure some uncomfortable situations.
There's there's a precondition monitoring that happens on projects with piling. So what they do is they monitor the levels of vibration across the site, and given that the housing across Brookdale is a significant distance, I imagine that they would determine that it wouldn't affect their footings, but there is a monitoring system which they place on site.
Okay. Is there any other site in the city that could hold this, or is this the best site? You've looked at other sites, I would imagine, considered other sites.
The owners considered other sites in the city. I think what's unique about this site is that it is a fair distance from everything. So the reason why we were designing for a higher density on the site is that it can accommodate the shadows of a high rise, or it has a significant boulevard along Brookdale, distance from the existing residential neighborhood, and also a frontage that would suit retail of a mixed-use building. So I think the site is particularly suited for high density.
Okay. I guess through you, Madam Chair, to Mark, I thought I recalled a soil study or evaluation of the property, and there were 3 areas on that site that had contamination. I thought the report said it wasn't that bad when it came to this kind of stuff. It could be cleaned up. I think that's what the report included. Do you recall that?
Through you, Madam Chair, are you talking about the Paris Holdings
Yeah,
property?
yeah.
Okay. We do have a bit of information on the property. There were some locations that were concerning, isolated but concerning, but I'll ask Mr. Fothrop if he recalls any more detail.
I think through you, Madam Chair, my recollection is very similar. There are pockets where there are issues, and that's based just on the historical uses of the property and where certain activities took place. But in this case, the proponents do have a record of site condition, which certifies the site as being suitable for residential use.
Last question through you, Madam Chair, to Mark. I thought I recalled that we took the height restriction off in a bylaw several years ago.
Through you, Madam Chair, we had a fairly good conversation about height maximums, and I think we arrived at what we've arrived at, which is that we changed it from 90 feet to 10 meters, which is not a lot of difference. It's about 10 feet. And we did that because in our experience, we hadn't received any inquiries that were considerably higher than, say, 100 feet. We're starting, of course, now to get slightly different proposals. As I mentioned, the one at 910 Montreal Road is a 12-story building. I think we've had some conversations with another property in the downtown of a similar height. We're now seeing this. I think perhaps, I mean, obviously the economics plays a part. Also, the provision of dwelling units. You know, we're all, as mentioned, all municipalities are in dire need of units. And so I suppose, you know, they're the ones who have done the business case. We're the planners. So generally we're relying on their business information on that subject.
During that discussion, if I recall, that was about 4 years ago, the fire department had no problems with
No.
height?
It would have been an issue in the past, but it doesn't appear to be an issue any longer.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I have any questions. I guess I just want to voice my feedback and concerns, and hopefully that's also taken back. I do believe something needs to go here, either on this property, on the Domtar property. Something needs to get the ball rolling. I've always sort of believed this space is if you build it, they will come. So we need one thing, and then something else might come, and then maybe, you know, within a decade we may see some more development there. So I'm excited to see, you know, a possibility. But I do have some concerns. Obviously, we are in dire need of housing units, and I support high density, but I really wish it mixed with the neighborhood better than the proposal does. And I know the shadow study, and I saw it, and it's really interesting. I've never really taken a look that deeply into a shadow study before, and it's not terrible, but it's not really all about the shadows. I live in a neighborhood similar to the one that is right next to this property, and I don't know how I would feel waking up in the morning and looking, across the way and seeing a 18-story building. So I'd love to see something like this. I do believe that, a mix of retail, residential, but if we could knock it down a few stories, maybe, like was mentioned, setting it back a little further, seeing a little bit more green space so that it blends better with the existing residential. I know that, there's quite a bit of space between the existing homes there and what's proposed here, but I still, when you're used to looking out your window and there's been nothing forever, and then this, I think it's a bit of a shock. I don't think it's a great fit. I think with some amendments to this plan, it could absolutely be something that I would support. But as it stands now, I don't think I would support this, but I do support something. So please listen to the residents' concerns and our concerns, and come back with something that I think we will be more than happy to support, so that we can see some more opportunities happen within the Paris Holdings property with time, because I do believe that we need one thing, and this could be it. I guess I do have a question. So we did have attached to our agendas two really thoughtful submissions from the community, and we'll hear some more. But were there any positive any positive feedback received from the community, or just those two? That's for the team.
Madam Chair, through you, so we have received some positive comments from the community, but they're more informal, so no formal written submissions, as you saw in the planning report. comments were along the lines of, this is great for the community in terms of, wanting to see something on the site be developed. As you mentioned, like, we do want something to occur here. It's been vacant for many years, and, what an opportunity that it could be. Or just some of the comments I received that are more positive in favor of the proposed development.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that's all I really have to say for now. I look forward to hearing from the public and what will come back to us in the new year. Thank
And
you.
I'm sure you'll hear shortly, but Councillor Hollingsworth first.
Just in a matter of procedure, Madam Chair, will you allow us to debate later when the motion is made, or do you want us to debate now? Like typically speaking, I have a problem with the recommendation, but typically, it's always been my understanding at PAC, ask questions, then when a motion is made, then debate. However, if you would like to kind of do it all at once, I have no problem debating the recommendation now, so I'm just want to make sure I don't get left in the wake kind of rolls by and I'm standing there on the beach wondering what just happened. So I'm asking you how you want to proceed.
That won't happen, but we've been gathering information now, and I'd like to continue that and then debate later.
That sounds spectacular. Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody else from council have a question? Yes, Councillor Sabra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, gentlemen. And I can't help but, I can certainly appreciate the vision. And my friend across the way alluded to, Field of Dreams, W.P. Kinsella, build it and they will come. But at the same time, you've done your marketing research in that. From what I understand within the condo markets, 60% of sales, pre-sales, is the advance threshold before you actually construct. That's the sale of 300 units for this project. Do you want to share with our realtors in town here as to your market research? Did you come up with 300 places that can be sold when we don't even know the prices of them yet?
I'll try to answer that as best as I can. Neither Ricky nor myself did the market analysis. I'm the planner on the project. Ricky's the architect. It's the owners of the property who would have done the math. And that sort of informs the vision for the project. But we're certainly not the ones that are doing the market analysis and talking to the local realtors. So I really can't answer that any better than that.
Usually when we talk about the housing needs, addressing the housing needs within the community, we seem to preface it with the word affordable. And a project this size really, sends off red flares for me with regards to, is this really affordable for Cornwall?
That I could probably give you a better answer on. Similar to what Mr. Boileau said, the proposal does provide a range of units from relatively small studio apartments or studio condominiums all the way up to 3 bedrooms. So in a city like Cornwall that is predominantly single-family housing, a project like this with smaller units and the gamut of unit sizes does provide some inherently, not necessarily capital A affordable housing units, but certainly does provide a form of housing that is inherently more affordable than a single detached home.
On the 3 acres, if I may, Madam Chair, on the 3 acres, this is totally consumed within the 3 acres. Is there any, as if we were building a jigsaw puzzle, or any way in which to readjust on the 3 acres, as has been suggested, possibly looking at a lower size, maybe even a 3rd tower? Would that be some type of a scenario that?
Certainly, we're as mentioned and as discussed. We're here to listen. So everything that's been said and it will be said this evening, we're taking back with us, and we'll discuss with the owners of the property. And we'll certainly look at all options.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is my last comment, but the more I look at it, and I used to live in Montreal in Côte Vertu area, and this is exactly the type of towers that they have everywhere, and that fits for there. But if I'm thinking Cornwall, I'm thinking waterfront, selling pre-sale of 60% of those, and somebody says it's a waterfront project, I don't see that. Like I'm not sure whether as ability to sell that what you have there is an attractive waterfront project. That's my comment, that's it.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Gardner?
Yeah, I just have one quick question to Mark. The building on beside La Maison, this project, Tilda, Cornwall's, pretty soon we're going to be dealing with the counties coming and asking us for water. How are these projects going to affect us in terms of the water, potable water? Have we a 60% overage, or where are we now in terms of what water we can sell, let's say?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm certainly not the expert on provision of water supply, but my understanding is that we've always been reasonably comfortable in the supply of water, especially for the urban settlement boundary that we have. I believe we have capacity for a population of, and I can't remember the number, but I think to answer your question, we have a comfortable supply of both water and sewer, especially now with the sewage treatment improvements. I believe we have documents that show that. I think when it comes to the discussion of supply to parts outside of Cornwall, then you do need to measure, well, what's the impact on Cornwall? How much exactly are we talking about supplying to another community? But I've always been under the impression, and Mr. Fawthrop may be able to provide additional information, but that we have a fairly comfortable supply of both water and sanitary sewer capacity in Cornwall for the foreseeable future, for what the official plan allows for development or requires in Cornwall. But I'll turn it to Jamie if he has any additional information.
Thank you, Mr. Boileau, and through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Boileau's comments are correct in that we do have a comfortable amount of water capacity, but particularly for infill projects, there is a capacity allocation already provided towards infill developments like this. As Mr. Boileau mentioned, it's where we're looking to expand the urban settlement boundary or supply water or sewer services to other communities. Those would be in addition to past calculations and would require a thorough review. But in this case, because it's an infill project, it's already has a water and sewer allocation towards it.
And thank you for that answer. I remember a number of years ago when we discussed going with water out of the community, it seems to me we were using about 50 to 60% of the water that we needed, and we have a whole lot left over, even with these projects. That's why I asked it. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there are no other questions, I'll go to the public in a moment. I have a couple of questions myself I'd like to ask. And one has to do with parking. The other developments that have been cited, both at Belmont and Montreal Road, and Bob Pell does work down on the in the cotton mills, have underground parking. And what made you decide to go to external parking, a 3-story concrete bunker?
I think, as Rick said earlier, the main limiting factor with how far we could put the parking underground was the geotechnical analysis and the water table. So the determination from the geotechnical analysis was that the most we could really sink the parking was that sort of half-story below grade.
And because the developments you mentioned have primarily underground parking, those developments will be more expensive to purchase parking. So above ground parking is cheaper to build and therefore more affordable to provide.
Thank you. And then with regard to height, I can't really tell from the images whether or not the 2-story podium that everything sits on, is that continuous with the buildings? Are they on top of that podium or beside it?
Structurally, aesthetically, they are, the podium is separate from the structure, but structurally, it's all part of, it's all one structure.
But the 21 stories aren't on top of a two-story, making for a 23-story
No, it's
Okay.
included, it's inclusive.
Good. And I did want to ask about shadow, because you've minimized it in your report. And in Lindsay's picture, we only saw one picture of the shadows. That was in Lindsay's presentation. And we saw it in the morning, obviously casting a pretty strong shadow on a desert at the moment. And I have a feeling that a shadow like that could help keep that property as a desert for some time in the future. It seemed to me the images we saw showed a significant shadow to the on the properties to the east of Brookdale in the afternoon, particularly in the wintertime. So, I mean, I think a shadow would certainly be a deterrent to future, we all want development, but we don't want this to be a solo tower surrounded by, you know, a desert that maintains itself as a desert, because it's not really an inviting neighborhood.
When analyzing a shadow study, there's a lot of things to look at. One of the things is at what time the shadow occurs. If the shadow is occurring at 9 a.m., that means the shadow is going to swing pretty rapidly away from that point. So if you actually look at the sequential slides of that, you'll notice that that shadow is not there, you know, at even 10:30. So if it's early morning shadowing, it tends to move faster than midday shadowing.
But the late afternoon shadow to the east, I found rather troubling.
So another way we would look at, you know, other municipalities have regulations for shadowing, and they say during the growing season, which is, you know, from 9 to 5 during the kind of summer solstice and it just ends at the winter. Is how long a shadow will stay in a certain spot over a period of time. And in this analysis, there is not a moment where the shadow stays in the same place more than 2 hours during the growing season, which is a favorable analysis.
True, but it's a big shadow.
And if I could also just add one point to your remark there, the reason why there is minimal discussion on the shadow analysis in my planning report is that wasn't initially asked for as part of the complete application requirements. It's something that was requested of us through discussions with staff. So it was prepared supplemental to the application materials that were submitted.
Thank you for that. And then perhaps somebody from city staff could tell me, how tall is the Seaway building? How many stories is that?
I believe it's just shy of 90 feet, which used to be our requirement. And so our new allowance is slightly higher than that, but the tallest buildings in Cornwall are generally, 10 stories.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as I mentioned, we've had a couple of recents that are 12 stories and that's what.
Right.
I don't know, I know that the committee have the shadow study in their hands in the agenda. I don't want to make it appear as though we're trying to not show the shadow study. And so I'm just saying this because if you want the audience to see the shadow studies, maybe we should do a quick review of what we have.
So I doubt that people in the back can decipher those diagrams, but I will do my best to summarize the shadow studies. So this is the March / September 22nd or spring-fall equinox. So the analysis of this set of shadow studies is the following. On March, during this time, the proposed development has no impact on any adjacent residential properties from dawn until 1 p.m. At approximately 1 p.m., shadowing begins to occur on the residential neighborhood east of the subject site, at the edge of Brookdale Avenue and Pine Street. At approximately 2 p.m., shadowing occurs on the residential neighborhood east of the subject site along Brookdale Avenue and Pine Street. And approximately 3 p.m., shadowing occurs on the residential neighborhood east of the subject site along Brookfield Avenue and Pine Street. And approximately 4 p.m., shadowing occurs on the residential neighborhood east of the subject site along Brookdale Avenue, Pine Street, Pine Lane, and Water Street West. At approximately 5 p.m., shadowing occurs on the residential neighborhood east of the site along Pine Street, Pine Lane, Water Street West, and its impacts are minimal due to the sun's angle and existing building shadows. So what that means is the buildings themselves, the existing buildings on site, are providing most of the shadows at that time. So during this period, the shadowing impacts on residential properties adjacent to the subject site are mostly limited to the late afternoon. The shadowing impacts are limited to a portion of homes near Brookdale Avenue for a 2 to 3 hour period of the day. So we go to the next period. So this is the summer solstice. So I'll just read the summary of this for you. So during this period, the shadowing impacts on the residential properties adjacent to the site are only during the late afternoon. The shadowing impacts are limited to a portion of homes near Brookdale Avenue for a 2 hour period of time. And for the December shadow study, during this period, the shadowing impacts on the residential properties adjacent to the site occur mainly in the afternoon. The shadowing impacts are limited to a portion of homes west of Seymour Avenue. The speed at which the shadow transitions during this time period, in which the impacted properties are in shadow, to a 1 to 2 hours period. So those are just the summaries of that shadow study. So as you can see, the shadowing is from the afternoon to the late afternoon for roughly 2 hour period during the growing season.
And if I may add to that, I think one of the key elements that you'll see as you know, I guess, and again, it's kind of hard to see it up here, but what we'd like you to see, obviously, is that the shadow is moving pretty quickly. So when you think that properties are going to be shadowed all afternoon, all day, that sort of thing, you know, just pay attention to where the yellow is, and it is moving quite rapidly. And then as you get later in the day, as Ricky mentioned, what you should see and what you should notice is the fact that a lot of the existing houses, you can see that kind of gray that's in behind and beside all those existing houses, that all those houses are shadowing each other already at that point in the day. So that's just two other kind of things to highlight in the shadow study. Hard to see, but that's two important pieces.
Thank you. Now, are there members of the public who wish to ask questions or pose comments? If so, please indicate by raising your hand, and if I acknowledge you, please give us your name. Yes, the gentleman in the second row. Stand, please, and give us your name.
My name is Ken Powell. I'm a resident of First Street West. I have a few questions.
Excuse me, are you able to use the speaker on the left side?
Oh, good.
Please?
Right beside
Yeah.
Ms. Key here, eh? Just come to the table.
So the very...
You just passed
No,
it,
no, no, right.
Ken? Back up, right there.
Oh, okay, there's a speaker there?
Okay.
This is what they
Yes, I told her, yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Please and thank you. Thank you.
Here we go. I hope everybody can hear me, because we, as people sitting in the back there, had a very hard time with some of the people that were talking earlier. As I said, I'm a resident of First Street West, and I have a few concerns. First of all, what's going to happen to the evaluation of our properties once these buildings are up? Are we going to, evaluation of our properties going to go up, or are they going to go down? Probably down. Yeah, more than likely that we're going to lose. Second, these buildings are fairly tall. We've put up with some wind problems when the bridge was there. Once they took the bridge down, it changed the direction of the wind. When the bridge was there, our windows and siding got pitted, got dirty. Now, you're putting up these high buildings of 21 stories and 18 stories. You're changing the direction of the wind again. And once you're going to start building these pile driving, it's going to bring another problem. A problem that we've already occurred this past summer. When they were doing some work on the property of demolition, we had a rat problem. Now, if you're going to do some pile driving, are we going to be infested with rats again? Now, I realize it's not the architects or the builders' problems. It's Cornwall's problem. Now, this past summer, I trapped a dozen rats. My neighbors probably trapped the same amount. They're coming from the Dumptar property. I'd like to know what Cornwall's going to do about that. Now, I realize that we do need money invested in Cornwall. And somebody made a comment there before about when you're coming off the bridge and the site of these buildings as you're coming into Cornwall. It's not going to look good. Because at the present time, and it's a good thing that there's no snow on the ground. Brookdale Avenue from Water Street up is terrible in the wintertime. Maintenance is a sham. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Yes. John. Yeah. And John Towndrow, this is, yeah.
My name is John Towndrow, and you probably all know me. I've been interested in, of course, community building for the 50 years that I've lived in Cornwall, and followed all of the visions and the strategic planning that's gone on. And actually, my colleague and I walked along the canal to work every day for 30 years, so we know it pretty well. And I'm one of the authors of the report that we prepared for planning, and you've read that. Our report is quite thorough. However, since we wrote that, we've had a chance to review the proposal by the consultants. So we've prepared another assessment based on that report, which we'll provide to you for your deliberation. So we'll get that to you fairly shortly. So two things I wanted to emphasize to you this evening is that you look at this development in terms of the big picture. Because we want to, when you think of this property, there's an enormous opportunity, and we got a bit of a glimpse of that with the FOTEN report, to create a neighborhood that is very progressive and very attractive to to the city and can provide a really good mix of all kinds of housing, light industrial, commercial, and even some energy generation. So that would be a wonderful legacy to transform this industrial site into something that we can be proud of. So I think it's in the best interest of the city to ensure that it evolves in an orderly fashion, and that you need to make sure that no development, and I think a couple of you councillors alluded to this, make sure that no development really kind of prevents or puts a chill on development in the future. And one of the things that struck me about this development was the not only the height, but the 3-car parking garage. And all of you can imagine or can picture in your mind what happened along First Street when the Cornwall Square was built and a parking garage was built. And so the businesses along First Street were pretty badly impacted. I don't think that it ever recovered. They're still in a building there that's vacant. So you have to imagine that if you want to build housing north of this proposal, who wants to look at a tall building and a 3-story parking garage? So think of it in terms of the long-term vision and have some idea of how the rest of it is going to go, rather than just approve one project and then hope for the best. So secondly, I want to suggest that the waterfront also belongs to all of us. And so when you have a project like this, sure, it's really attractive to the people who are facing south and looking over the waterfront, not so much to the west over the industrial site. But if you think of this as an example of what's happened in other cities like Brockville and Kingston, they've given it their waterfront over to tall buildings, and so that kind of in other words, that sells that beauty to a few people who own a unit in that building. And so we want to make sure that the waterfront stays public, open, and available to all of us, as opposed to just a few people. And we have a chance here in Cornwall to be unique and progressive, and I don't like the idea of us succumbing to what's happened in many other cities along the lake and along St. Lawrence River. And we know from talking to people that many of those cities, like Brockville and Kingston, really regret what that they've given over their waterfront to some of these very high buildings. So it's not to say that this shouldn't be developed, but I think it can be developed in a much more sensitive way that gives much more respect to the public open space that we have. And that canal is a gift. It's a wonderful, wonderful waterfront space that we really need to honor and preserve. So I think that's really what I'd like to say about it. Look at the long term and think of it as an important public space.
Thank you, John. Yes. Yes, and identify yourself too, please, Etienne.
Etienne Saint-Aubin, a long-time resident of Cornwall. On that basis, I want to say that I'm very impressed with this process. I recall that Cornwall, to this date, is the only municipality in Ontario to have said no to Walmart. And why do I reference that? Because it took courage to do that. to do the right thing then, because it was, of course, attractive to have development in our community. Ultimately, Walmart found another place within the community, as you all know, and in the right place. So making the right decision is the challenge. This is not to vilify, as in a storybook, a developer. That's not the perspective of anyone. But the question is, what is the right thing to do here? Now, number one, I don't know how much the standard freeholder holds much sway anymore in our community, with all due respect. And the reason I invoke that is that I read a recent letter to the editor that impressed me greatly. And you folks, if you don't get access to this kind of input, you should be provided it by your staff. I am honored as a citizen to be aware of the fact that there are people in our community with great wisdom whose voices fortunately come forward in this kind of instance. And heed must be paid to their vision of what Cornwall could be like. Now, I want to quickly, and I don't want to go on at length, but I want to deal with the question of this being a condominium, yet again, another condominium project. In my previous line of work as director of the now Roy McMurtry Legal Clinic, I became acutely aware that there was a drastic shortage of quality rental accommodation. And I say quality. There was an abundance of dilapidated accommodation, but there was a lack of quality rental accommodation, affordable, certainly, there still is, but there still is a huge lack of rental accommodation. If anything, we're not short of condominiums. I know every developer wants to have a condominium. Apparently that's something to do with how much you can borrow at the bank or whatever it is. That's fine. It's not my concern, but the concern of you folks might be to achieve a better balance between condominium properties and rental accommodation. I also want to point out that when I had the privilege of sitting on the waterfront committee, it was made clear to us that it was more than pockets. These pretty big damn pockets, excuse my language, on the former industrial sites of polluted territory. And what the planners of the day wanted to avoid was the cherry picking of sites that would be developed lucratively, while leaving the citizens of Cornwall holding the bag ultimately for the recuperation of those polluted properties. In conclusion, I urge you, obviously something must happen on those lands. They are a blight on our community. You can't have, and I don't know what the exact number is, but it's a pretty big fraction or percentage of our community which is lying fallow. You gotta pay attention to this. Get going. Get your staff to pay attention to this. You are the political leaders, Madam Chair, and all the members here. Bring this back and back and back as an obsession. Obviously, people will begin to knock at the door, thank heavens, and we don't want to say we're holding off on them forever, but we've got to get going on determining what is the best use and the best disposition of this property. And I concur with the view that you don't start with the jigsaw puzzle with this kind of a major piece without having thought through what's going to go connected to it. It's a fairly significant landmark. So that was really what I wanted to convey, but I want to leave simply by saying that as leaders, Madam Chair, and your colleagues of the City of Cornwall, I think you should be sharing in my own pride to be part of a community which has such an engaged citizenry and one which has people who are willing to bring their wisdom and knowledge to the assistance of council, and which should be called upon. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Saint-Aubin. Yes, Mr. Grant.
Good evening. It's always nice to visit council chambers and see all your wonderful faces again. Oh, I'm sorry. Jose. Glenn Grant. I live in Cornwall. Someone asked me the other day, have you lived here all your life? I said, not yet. What I want to talk about is the traffic impact study. Now, I know that you always do a traffic impact study on this type of development or any kind of development. But I want to talk about mostly the MCA, Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. They approached the city a year and a half ago to talk about that intersection. And it's a very interesting intersection, I'll put it that way. We don't have anything like this in Cornwall anywhere. Matter of fact, I don't think there's many in many cities. And I know Mr. and Mrs. Earl, they have a house right in the corner there, and I'm sure that they see some interesting accidents there. But the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne was concerned about the near misses and the accidents there because a lot of their residents use that intersection on a daily basis. So I'm hoping that when we do consult with the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, we include that impact study. You know, I feel it's a tough decision for council because we're looking at revenues because we have a heck of a lot of costs. And it's not easy. You look at these two projects going to bring in a substantial amount of revenue, but we have to offset that with how is it going to impact our waterfront. And our waterfront plan is something that we hold special in this community. We have for years. So I hope when council makes their deliberations, they don't just look at the positives of the revenues, but they look at the impact on our community. So thank you, and good luck with your deliberations.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Yes, the gentleman in the back row. And then Stephen Alexander after that.
Hi, my name is Bob Earl, and I'm here with my wife. And if anybody's going to be impacted by this development, I think I'm going to be right on it. Ground zero. I live at 15 Brookdale Avenue, right across the road from this proposed development. And I've seen tons, in my years, I've lived there 86 years. And in my lifetime, I've seen more changes than any of you have ever seen. The canal was there. The canal wasn't, the canal was filled in. Domtar was going. I worked Domtar for many years. And I watched them build a bridge, and I watched them tear it down. And all the time that was built there, we lived under the shadow of the bridge, not to mention all the dirt and crap that flew off it. So I can see no real downside with this project because it's going to improve the area for sure. And if we don't miss the boat here, what's down the line for us? So I think we got to have a hard look at whether we can trade off some of the problems with the benefits it's going to create. So, in my opinion, I would like to hope that this group decides it's a go and let's get on with it. So, anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Earl. And yes, Mr. Alexander.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and those assembled here. My name is Stephen Alexander, and maybe for the benefit of the proponents and the planners in the room, I'm a registered professional planner, member of the Ontario Professional Planning Institute. And I had about a 37-year career providing what was a planning board, then became a planning advisory committee, and also the council planning advice on a range of planning issues, from development applications to plans of subdivision to community improvement plans and a whole range of things. I started off in a very junior position and ended up as general manager of planning, permits, and recreation. There has been a lot already said, and there's a very good summary of an analysis that was done by Mr. Towndrow and others. And I don't intend to repeat that, but I have to tell you that I think it's well done, and I support its contents. So I'm going to try just cover a number of issues, probably small issues, but my intent is for brevity not to repeat what they are saying. And I know the world is changing, as has been referenced with the provincial policy statement, various changes to the Planning Act that support Mr. Ford's view of build houses, and he gets some of that right and some of that wrong, I think, depending where it is. But there is a need for housing, and I think Etienne spoke about the issue of rental housing, and I think that is very much a target. And I think the city's made some significant progress on that with the developments at McConnell and Ninth and other things that have been happening. I think you as the collective and the staff have made good progress with some of that. Still work to do, but where we go. With respect to this proposal, I think it raises a number of problematic issues. And there was a bit of discussion before about maximum heights and those kinds of things. Of what we have for towers already. As Mr. Boileau said, the height requirement forever, since I started, was 90 feet. And has recently gone to essentially 100 feet, right? So that's either an extra 1 or 2 stories. And the reason I raise that is because a story depends on how high the ceiling heights are and how much of that structure takes up part of that. So when you get panoramic towers, which met the 90-foot requirement, it has 10 stories because the floors presumably are thinner and you can deal with that. But most of what we have in Cornwall for towers are have really been built in that environment. And even recent things don't really would not exceed that 90-foot requirement, let alone the 30 meters. Panoramic towers is probably the tallest of all those. I know there was a discussion about the Seaway. I'm not sure that it's quite so tall. The development that's on the Cornwall site is a tower, but meets that height standard. Second and Pitt meets that height standard. Sydney and Second meets that height standard, or in fact is considerably below that. So that's the history of the kind of tall buildings in Cornwall. I think Mr. Boileau spoke about, well, there may be others that are coming, but at this point, that's kind of the history of those things. What I do want to say about this site and this development is that this is an important site, and it's a site that deserves a development. As the planning report prepared by the consultants points out, it has full urban services, and for a variety of reasons, including that it starts to make some progress on those lands that collectively we'll call the Domtar lands. And I know this was CIL lands, but we'll, for the purposes of this, just lump them all together. So I think there is room, and it's important to make progress to develop this site. The difficulty I have is with the height and density of this. There is very little ground space left. And there was a discussion before, I think that Mark tried to look at what the total number of units per acre might be. But I think from my experience, I can tell you there is no comparable anywhere. This is immensely dense development as it goes. I do want to ask a question, maybe at the very end of this issue of Water Street and the extension of that and how critical that is to this development, but I'll save that for a bit longer. In many urban centers, there is a very strong push for towers, particularly in Ottawa at this point. But a lot of that is talked about for different reasons. They want intensification in towers around LRT stations because that's part of their strategy to deal with the importance of that significant input in public transport. I mean, we have buses there, and it is what it is, but that's fine. But those, every municipality gets driven to certain approaches because of certain things like that. Toronto probably does about the same thing. Most of the very high towers are around subway stations, but Toronto also has a history of what is generally described as bonus zoning. So you get to build more density as long as, in Toronto's case, they say, as long as you're providing a proportion of that in affordable rental housing. So that drives some of their approaches to deal with towers and densities and deal with that. Anyway, those are my general comments. What I would like to do, though, is go to in your agenda on page 39. There's quite a good analysis of the relief that is sought to accommodate this development. So, and I think there was already some comment from Councillor Good about this issue of setbacks, and they're looking for those. Minimum landscaped area, what you saw in those drawings, there is very little landscaped area, right? It's full of buildings and parking structures. So they're looking for a significant reduction in that. The heights are significant, right? If we've got a 30-meter height restriction now, and they're looking for 74, that's 2.5 times that which is currently allowed. The new number, as much as it's only marginally above the 90 feet, it's still, some relief was given to developments because of that. I'm not sure how familiar you would be with angular planes, but they're asking for what I consider to be reasonably extensive variations from the angular planes. And if I can explain that to you, what you do is adjacent with a lot line, you draw 60 degrees up. And you cannot project a building outside that 60 degrees. So imagine it's a flat surface, right? And that does two things. One, it tries to probably deal with shadows to some extent, but it also requires that if you want a taller building, that it has to be pushed further back from the street. But they're already applying for other setback variances anyway, which go to that. But instead of being an angular plane of 60 degrees, they're looking for some at 76 degrees. So now you tilt that angle to 76 or 67 on Brookdale, and those buildings are now bigger and closer to the street than would ordinarily be permitted. I have a real challenge with this parking issue. It's been my experience that notwithstanding that some municipalities are dropping the required number of parking spaces, and that probably has applicability when I talked about the LRT in Ottawa, that when people can walk out of their building and walk to a significant piece of public transportation infrastructure, then car ownership may decline a little bit, so you don't worry about that. My experience in Cornwall is that that really simply does not work. This is still primarily an automobile-driven municipality. So to go less than one space per unit is a recipe for failure, right? I mean, and they've got some visitor spaces, but they're shared between the residential visitors and the commercial uses. So I think that's a significant variance requested and shouldn't be there. They need to add more parking. But the problem is this site is so chock-a-block a building. They've talked about how it's not sensible to try and put it underground. Then you can add an extra story to that multi-story car park, right? So now we're talking about a scale of the Cornwall Square parking garage. And the last one just deals with parking aisle sizes and things like that. My experience, for what it's worth, is that you really need to stick to those parking aisle sizes and parking stalls, because invariably some people who will buy these things will be seniors. They drive and they don't like to be hemmed in by narrow aisles and need to be able to maneuver. So my conclusion is that some of those variances, particularly the number of stories and the height, are dramatic, right? And I think, notwithstanding there really needs to be something on this site and it needs to make some progress, those are asking for too much. And the whole development needs to be rethought. I wonder if you'll just indulge me for a second. Because I was on the city's committee of adjustment for a while, so it would deal often with these kind of variances, right? And I'm going to speak to this not because it's relevant in terms of the facts, but it's relevant in terms of the process. So some of you would know that Riverdale Terrace development on 2nd Street West, they built a building on the north side of that street. It's the most recent development. That when they made an application to the community adjustment for a variety of variances, one being height, by the way, they got one story above what normally would have been there. But the building was pushed to the back. And there were a number of objectors from Osborne Street who said, you're gonna shadow my exterior amenity space, and you're gonna shadow my house. So we as the community adjustment, we're trying to understand all of those kind of things. And eventually we deferred that matter. Did not make the developer particularly happy at the time, but I said, and the staff said at the time, there's a better way to do this. Let's pull the building to the front. It then architecturally speaks to the street. Put the parking in the back where the shadow is, and it fixes a whole bunch of things. So he wasn't very happy, but we deferred it. We did not reject that application. And we said, you need to go back to the drawing board and think this thing through. He was not happy. If you know the person that's involved, he's a little bit of a whatever. But in the 2 weeks I think it took to get the matter back on the Committee of Adjustment, he'd actually realized he didn't want to start battling people and end up at the LPAT and a whole series of other things. He thought about what was being raised and actually went with where we said to go. My point being that we sent him back to the drawing board, and the outcome was far better. I mean, that's an approach you could take to this, right? You could say, you know what, the development's great, but there's parts of this that just do not work for the benefit of the neighborhood, but whatever. So you send it back to the drawing board, they rethink it through. Sometimes they'll come up with a better solution, and then you're dealing with a better solution, right? Or at least there's some movement and some discussion happening there. So, sorry, I mean, that didn't really have any implication for this and the scale and all the rest of it. It's a reason to point out that if you push back a little bit for the right answer, sometimes you get that, right? And when people drive by that site today, they like it, right? I'm a bit concerned that there's a bit of a dismissal of the shadowing. And I can understand this stuff, you know, it's easy to, sometimes it's hard for everybody to understand what those shadowing impacts are. And they vary by time of year, but interesting enough, as a person who lived on Seymour Street for some years in my early days here, for those shadows to get as far as Seymour Street is dramatic, right? To deal with that. So that's probably as much as I want to say. I'm a bit concerned that their conclusion of the consultants, the planning consultants reach the very last line in their conclusions and recommendations. It says it is concluded that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment can be considered as good planning and should be approved. I don't think this proposal, as you see it today, is good land use planning. I don't think it's good community planning. I think it needs a lot of rethinking in terms of dealing with that. And with that, I'll probably wrap up. Maybe I can ask Mr. Boileau a question, or Lindsay. I know that there was the suggestion, Mark, that the Water Street extension is critical to this, and I agree. And I know it's wrapped up in a disposition of land. I don't know if you know, or maybe Jamie does, what the environmental conditions may or may not be on that land. Because I know it's a little bit further west, but there's an old dock that Domta used to load things off. And often, you know, where things are loaded, depending on what that product is, can have a significant impact on that. I mean, I know on 2nd Street West, there was coal stored on site and things like that. That's not where we're talking about here in terms of the roadway, but I don't know if Jamie or anybody knows if there are any environmental conditions that start to prevent that, because when I hear it's critical to it, you can't not make it there, right? If there's contamination that stops that.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think it's critical to a development of this magnitude. And and in fact, I would think that the owners would agree that, you know, they would not be able to develop a site with this scale with only frontage onto Brookdale Avenue. They need Water Street. And so to your point about the environmental situation I presume you're talking about Transport Canada's land.
Yes,
Right.
well, where you're trying to get the Water Street roadway in.
Well, so it affects, the transaction actually is within the intersection, I understand. And maybe I'll have Mr. Fothrop just speak a little bit further to that, but the current communication is with respect to the property within the intersection, but of course, we also require the land that goes west, that is Transport Canada's, to provide proper right-of-way to be adjacent to this subject property. I'm not sure, Jamie, if you have anything further.
Through you, Madam Chair, the lands to be divested would extend to the western limit of this parcel, which is where the access egress is proposed to be located. I'm not aware of any environmental issues with this particular portion of the Transport Canada property. I believe the loading dock you're referring to is along the canal. It is another
Yeah, it's
about
further west.
double that distance to the west from the Brookdale Avenue intersection, but the point is well taken.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. And are there any other comments? Yes, sir.
I'm going to keep this really short, because I know meetings are long. I've attended many meetings as a former employee of a municipality, as a planner, builder, building official, recreation director, clerk administrator. I got airlifted in here by a couple of gentlemen in the front row here, and I just got to read a little bit of what's going on. And I just made some quick comments.
Excuse me,
that I'd like to
would you
make.
mind identifying yourself first,
Oh,
please?
sorry, it's Terry Hart. Terry Hart. You know, we're talking about the canal and the waterfront and that sort of thing. And I've got a lot of history with the old canal because it's disappeared, where my grandfather used to park his boat in the canal every winter at the bottom of Pitt Street. And so I'm familiar with the area. And I just read through a few of the things, and one was on waterfront planning. It says, encourage the redevelopment of industrial lands and key selected sites along the waterfront for residential, commercial, or other uses that are compatible with the public enjoyment of the waterfront. I think that was really important for me, is that it's the public enjoyment of the waterfront. And I think we have to keep that in mind too, because it's very important to us, that waterfront. The other thing was the establishment of architecture that is compatible with the existing conditions of building heights should have a smooth transition to adjacent existing building forms. And I think those are two things that caught my eye right away, and I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And unless there are other questions or comments, we'll move to the debate as Councillor Hollingsworth described it, but we do have an action recommended. I'll read it to you, and if somebody chooses to move that, fine, or make a contrary motion. The action recommended that the planning report to amend the city's zoning bylaw amendment be received, as the bylaw to remove the hold category and rezone the vacant parcel of land at 10 Brookdale Avenue from mixed-use commercial with a hold to mixed-use commercial with site-specific exemptions will be considered at a later date. Do we have a mover? Councillor Gardner? Seconder? Councillor Bennett? Debate? Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually going to vote against the motion, because if I had it my way, I would just remove the hold and let this development progress. A couple things that I think are worth noting. Maybe I'm wearing my councillor hat instead of my Planning Advisory Committee hat, so if it seems like I'm muddying the debate a little bit, forgive me. But the truth of the matter is this: the municipality has a shortage of housing. It's been well documented right across the country. There's a shortage of housing, and if you're familiar with the concept of supply and demand, if you want the cost of housing to stay the same or go down, you have to increase the supply and ideally mitigate the demand. And the only way that's going to happen, or the most effective way to have that happen, is to allow private developers to develop. If you talk to most planners, Mr. Alexander, when I first started now about 300 years ago, told me that the best way to build a city was to infill. That was the most cost-effective method of developing a city, and I'm sure Mr. Boileau, correct me if I'm wrong, because when you infill, you don't stretch your services as finely. You already have sewer and water, the bus routes are comparable, fire, police, all those services are already kind of in place, and so this particular development is basically within the city core. It eliminates the urban sprawl, which ultimately undermines any potential revenue we generate. So you think of, you fix a shortage of housing to a certain degree. 500 units is pretty significant, and we develop the city in the fashion that we've arguably said we need to develop it. The other thing that seems to be mined is that we talk about where to put a high-rise building. What's the ideal location? Well, certainly I think all of us would agree that if you were going to put a high-rise building in the middle of Riverdale, that'd probably be a terrible idea. And I think you could probably pick a whole bunch of chunks of the municipality where, you know, Amherst Corners, the middle of that particular community, would be not such a good idea. Various components of the East End as well. This particular piece of land has been sitting vacant for 17 years. I know that because I watched them close the doors. And it's empty, and how do you develop a property? Well, you develop it by allowing developers to develop it. So to stand in the way of this particular project, we're kind of undermining the whole point of trying to develop it in the first place. And I know there's some discussion of minimizing the amount of stories they can build, and I'm no developer, and I'm not much of a businessman either, but it seems to me that if the margin, where the profit comes from, is the additional, 4 or 5 stories at the top, by saying, well, you can't do that, now you eliminate the ability for these people to make a profit. And I mean, I'm sure that's kind of why they're doing this in the first place, and I kind of can appreciate that. And Cornwall's property closed in 1992, and last time I checked, certainly in the back end, there's some development, but the front end, aside from one little apartment building, that particular piece of property is sat vacant, 32 years, give or take. And I believe that if we don't encourage developers at the Domtar site, 17 years from now, it's still going to be an empty chunk of property. I mean, the question is, do we want to develop our vacant lands or not? Certainly, I guess there seems to be a sense that high rises are bad. I don't necessarily subscribe to that point of view. And quite candidly, I've been on record as saying our current limits for buildings I'm not a fan of, because I think it minimizes the ability developers to make profit. Going on top seems to make more sense. So if it were up to me, Madam Chair, and they asked to go even higher, I'd probably support that as well. So I'm going to vote against it because I would rather see it move quicker than slower. On a little side note that I find interesting, and maybe it's just my own way of seeing the world, but what I find curious is that if I planted a tree in my front yard and it grew to 85 or 90 feet and it casted a shadow, the environmentalists would tell me that's a good thing. Yet somehow when we talk about a building casting a shadow, that's a bad thing. And perhaps somebody can figure out how that works, because I just can't seem to wrap my head around that one. Anyway, those are my comments, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I seconded the motion mostly. I'm actually in favor of this development. What I just want to make sure is that the concerns that have been raised here by our residents, that have been raised by our staff, that the developer, who seemed to know what this recommendation, that it was coming, and by their comments seemed to be willing to work with what the suggestions they had. And so I don't think we're really delaying it too much anyway, because as we all know, we've got to get that piece of property to continue Water Street. And while I like the enthusiasm Mr. Fawthorpe showed that it could be done in the first quarter, we've been talking about this property for the last quarter of my life. So I don't think this delay is going to affect it that much in regards to the fact that we've got to wait for this property to be divested anyway. But I do agree with Councillor Hollingsworth that I think it's time to start looking at our heights. Things have changed a lot since we put height limits in a million years ago, it seems like, and it's time to take a look at that as well. I don't know if 18 and 21 is the height. For me, I'm thinking probably a few stories could be shaved off that, but I'll leave that for the future debate when this comes back to us again. And I just want to say that everything that's changed in this city, everything that's been built, one of them somewhere along the line had to be the first. And every time there was a first, you get pushback with the concerns, and that pushback is good and it's needed, because that's how we're going to get it right. So this will be the first of its kind to be this high, and the pushback that we're getting is good, because it's going to make sure that if we do increase the heights, that we're going to do it properly, and it's going to be accepted by the people that are going to be living beside it more than anything else. So to not do this recommendation, I think would be a mistake, and I don't think it's going to delay this project much at all, because really it can't move forward until we get that property divested in front. The only other thing I did want to mention is we talk about, and I've heard the comment many times, it's been made to me more than I can count, is that we need to protect our residents' access to the waterfront. You've never had access to that waterfront for as long as I can remember. 120 years you've not had access to that waterfront. And I can tell you, with this development in that road, you will have access to that roadway that has never been available to any of us before. There could be sidewalks, bike path, anything along that side that's going to give us that kind of access that we've never had before. So I think that the compatibility of this project and our waterfront is actually quite good. Those are my comments on that, but I do support the motion, and I think I'm looking forward to hearing what comes back to us from the developer once they take into consideration everything that's been said here, because there's been some very good concerns raised, and I think they should be addressed. Thank you.
And Mr. Boileau, I believe you have some insights to share.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make this comment because I've heard a couple of times now about access to the waterfront. The waterfront plan includes that paths would be protected for the public, both on the north and south side of the canal. And we have always, in our waterfront plans for decades now, tried to ensure that the public have access to the waterfront's edge. Cordalls is a very good example of that, or I should say the former Cordalls parking lot and the subdivision that is there. And, you know, there was a bit of pushback at that time, going back quite a number of years. So my point is that these are Transport Canada lands. This property is not immediately adjacent to the canal. As we've talked about, Transport Canada own a corridor there. Some of it would be required for the right-of-way to be extended for Water Street, but the goal would be that the public would always have public access on the north side as well as the south side of the canal.
Thank you, Mr. Boileau. Any other comments? Councillor Gardner?
It's not a wrap-up, but at the end of the day, we've listened to the developer talk about what they want to do. They've taken information from our residents, and they have a chance to adjust to whatever some of the things that the residents want. At the end of the day, we're not making a decision tonight. So to take a little time, a month, 2 months, or whatever it takes to get the information right for our residents and for the developers, I think I brought this motion forward to do that, to have the time. I'm working on another merger. We've had 2 meetings. We haven't decided anything because we have to get the information right before we do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was your wrap. I'll call the question. Those who support the motion, all in favor? Opposed? Thank you. The motion stands. Moving on. We have a housekeeping amendment, and I'm assuming it's Ms. Sharif who will speak to this. Sayana Sharif, planner. Go ahead, Ms. Sharif. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. That was a very long presentation, so I'm going to try and keep this very quick. My name is Sayana Sharif, and I'm a development planner with the city's planning division. Today I'll be presenting PAC file Z0523, proposed housekeeping exercise number 2, amendments to the city zoning bylaw number 2022-001. Next slide, please. The zoning bylaw is a land use planning tool used to implement the policies of the provincial policy statement and the city's official plan through zones, standards, and provisions. It is intended to be an evolving document that reflects the changing needs of the city's community and province at large. Next slide, please. Housekeeping exercises are staff-initiated amendments to the zoning bylaw. It aims to improve the clarity and consistency, as well as increase the utility of the zoning bylaw, resulting in a simplified compliance process for all stakeholders. The City of Cornwall's most current zoning bylaw, number 2022-001, was adopted by Council in January 2022. The first housekeeping exercise was enacted in June of this year through bylaw number 2023-061. This current housekeeping exercise is significantly smaller and proposes a total of 4 items. I will now present an overview of these items. Items 1 and 2 entail addition of site-specific exceptions to the highway commercial zone and employment area light zone for the properties 1539, 1541 Vincent Massey Drive and 341 Balmoral Avenue, respectively. These exceptions were previously approved through site-specific rezoning applications with respect to the city's previous zoning bylaw. When drafting the city's current zoning bylaw, several site-specific exceptions in the previous bylaw were filtered out to make the new bylaw shorter and more user-friendly. In the past few months, staff have received applications that indicate a continuation and further expansion of the accepted uses. Staff are therefore proposing that the previously approved site-specific exceptions be reflected in the current zoning bylaw. Item number 3 entails addition of place of worship as a permitted use in all the zones that permit place of assembly as of right. The affected sections are the various commercial zones as well as the major institutional zone. The zoning map on screen indicates all the lands the proposed amendment would apply to. With this amendment, staff hope to provide more zoning flexibility, especially considering the city's increasing population and changing demographics. It is important to note that the city's previous zoning bylaw essentially considered places of worship as a place of assembly, both of which have the same minimum parking requirements. It is staff's opinion that a place of worship will have a similar or lower impact on surrounding land uses and will hence be compatible with the established uses in these zones. Item number 4 proposes adding additional provisions for the use of transportation terminals in the highway commercial zone. Transportation terminals were added as a permitted use in the highway commercial zone as part of the first housekeeping exercise. The proposed provisions are as reflected in other zones which permit transportation terminals. The provision requires visual screening such as landscape berm or screening fence between a terminal and any abutting sensitive land use. As mentioned previously, housekeeping amendments are staff-initiated zoning amendments used to improve the clarity, consistency, and utility of the zoning bylaw. A total of 4 items are being proposed through this current housekeeping. For more details on the proposal, the evaluation process, and rationale, please refer to report number 2023-171 from today's PAC agenda. The agenda can be accessed online through the city's website under the Planning Advisory Committee window. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Sharif. Are there questions? Seeing none, is there a motion? The recommendation is for support. Yes, Ms. Councillor Good? So moved. Seconded. Councillor Bennett? Discussion? All in favor? Thank you. I believe that was unanimous. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hollingsworth, seconded by Ms. Gee. All in favor? Good night, everybody, and Merry Christmas.
Do you have another council?
Nope, that's it. We had our last one. And you know, we didn't wish everybody Merry Christmas, and it went over for 20. I had such a cold and a cough, I didn't go, but